Alright, it looks like we're live now. I should probably make sure... Oh, yeah. That won't be a problem at all. We'll wait a couple minutes just so people can get in here so I can start talking about it. Which will be fine, since it'll probably take me a couple minutes to actually find a match anyway. Just couldn't be a good thing. It just couldn't be a good thing, could it? I couldn't come on here and talk about something I liked. I couldn't come on here and talk about maybe a movie that surpassed my expectations and wasn't terrible. But no, that couldn't be it. Not in this year. Not in... Really, not since 2013, maybe? I mean, you go back the years, and movies are just better from forever ago. But it seems like from 2013 onward... That's like the main 6-year period where everything just goes straight to shit. And man, it is not fun. Oh wow, I'm actually connecting to a match. That was faster than I expected. Well, there we go. I guess this pleasantly subverted my expectations for once. We have Joker. We do have Joker. That's our that's our good thing for the year. We get a good thing. Yeah. Alright, we got a good 100 people in here. Okay. So I'm going to start this off with explaining my position on The Shining movie. I don't like it at all. It's fucking garbage as an adaptation. It's insulting as an adaptation, really. But it's a really good movie. I'm not talking about that movie, though. We're talking about its really shit sequel. So, I'm gonna be pretty much exclusively focusing on it as an adaptation of the book. But I will talk about it from an objective standalone angle as well, because it's not good as either one. And I'll be referencing the books, too, so if this is something... If you haven't read Dr. Sleep, and you plan to, and if you haven't read The Shining, and you plan to, and you don't want either of those spoiled, then this probably isn't the right stream for you to be watching. Oh, shit. Shouldn't have done that. Oh, I survived it, though. That was fun. So if you want to log off now and just not watch this stream because of book spoilers, then there's your warning. Don't do the thing if you don't want to have it spoiled for you. Right, so, Shining movie, great, but horrible as an adaptation. Frankly, insulting as an adaptation. And you can try and pretend like Stanley Kubrick being a great director is a argument for why it's better than the book, and I really don't care, because it's not an argument. But, great movie, horrible adaptation. I don't like the movie, but it's still good. Really good. Excellent acting, excellent effects, excellent music. Well, aside from the... Really, actually, the only musical score in The Shining I actually remember is the main theme. You know, that dun, 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 dun. Which, you know, is pretty iconic. It's a good score. I'd have to watch it again to actually remember any of the other tracks. But it's a great movie. Dr. Sleep is an extremely good sequel to The Shining book. I read it just earlier this year. Well, earlier as in more like I finished it a month and a half to 2 months ago. And it was great. I loved it. As a fan of The Shining book, it was absolutely phenomenal. And it really expanded upon the Shining powers that the movie conveniently left out, because why call the movie The Shining... And then, you know, leave out the Shining part of The Shining. That's great. I don't want to rant about that too much, though. That's a video for another day. Dr. Sleep is incompetent in pretty much every single way. I like a slow burn movie, right? I like watching the Lord of the Rings extended editions. Frequently. I like watching movies like The Grey, and The Revenant, and Blade Runner, and Alien, and even Terminator 1 to an extent. Not as much as Terminator 2, but I think people don't give the first movie as much credit as it deserves, because I watched them all recently, and they're pretty good. The problem is, this movie has horrible pacing. Like, some of the worst I've seen in quite a long time. I mean, there were people all throughout the theater checking their phones pretty much the whole time. Even I had to check my phone at one point just to be like, is this almost over? It's really boring. You gotta really try to bore me for me to give you that kind of criticism. The problem is, it's trying to jam-pack what really should have been either a probably a mini-series, like, kind of like The Haunting of Hill House. I'll relate it to that since Mike Flanagan did that too. They crammed what should have been a mini-series into, I think, a 2.5 hour movie. And this one, it doesn't make sense for such a slow burn book that really delves into the characters and their personalities, their strengths and weaknesses, the demons that plague them, and all the things that led up to that from the Shining book, to then make that into a 2-hour movie that cuts out so much of the subtext and nuance of the characters that was so important and made the book so good. And what you get is a lot of really vapid characters. Even Danny, the main character, just doesn't have much of a personality. He's like really boring, normal, good guy actor that doesn't do much of anything. It's kind of depressing, especially since I really cared about him in the book. And I think part of it is the really awful editing is what makes or at least part of what makes it so bad with its pacing. I can't think of any movie that has had so many fade-in transitions ever. I don't think I've ever seen that many. And it's strange coming from Mike Flanagan, because I didn't have any issues with the editing in The Haunting of Hill House. But the editing was just atrocious in Dr. Sleep. I kind of floored by how incompetent it was. And I don't know if that was a decision he made, or if there was some behind-the-scenes shit I don't know about. And there could be. I don't want to place the blame without knowing all the context behind why they made certain decisions. But they would fade in and out constantly to scenes that had very little to do with one another, without actually fleshing out those scenes to any really great extent. Like, people who didn't read the Shining book or the Dr. Sleep book are gonna walk into this and probably not understand anything. Like the subtext of the True Knot, all the context behind why Dick Halloran is so important. Especially if you've only read The Shining, or seen The Shining movie, rather. Because Dick Halloran didn't die in The Shining movie, or in the book, rather. He did die in the movie. It was a complete character assassination, really fucking insulting. He's in this movie, but I wouldn't fault anyone for not even remembering who exactly he was, since he had so little to do with the original Shining movie. And in the book, he has a bit of a presence in the book. Actually less of one than there was in this movie. And for some reason, they were like, oh, he's going to be a ghost for most of the book. Which, you know, I understand he plays a role in the book, but if he's dead in the context of the movie, you either got to go full book or full movie. And I don't entirely fault Flanagan for having to adapt, essentially... adapt the book and make a faithful sequel to the Shining movie, because they're complete contradictions to one another. So on one hand, I get that he had a lot against him, but you gotta commit to one or the other. If you're gonna make a sequel to the Shining movie, you gotta go full sequel. You can't just mix the two, because then you have a lot of things that just don't make sense without the valuable context that's present in the books. And the movie, weirdly enough, for I want to say the first 2/3 probably, is actually a really good adaptation of the Dr. Sleep book. I mean, there's some changes in those first 2/3, but nothing really horrible. Nothing that was really offensive. The really offensive stuff comes later, and we'll get to that. But the problem is that just because it's a good adaptation doesn't mean it's a good movie, and I had to keep asking myself, am I liking this only because I know what's going on because I read the book? And I think that's mostly what it was, because the first 2/3 of the movie I was actually kind of enjoying myself, but I had to keep putting it into the context of someone who has not read the books, and man, you would not understand anything if you didn't read the Shining book. Without the context and without the subtext of how Jack Torrance affected Danny's life, and even what The Shining is to that extent. Because, like I said, The Shining movie, as good of a movie as it is, completely misses the point of The Shining book. The Shining is all about the power that Dan and Jack, to a lesser extent, has. And they kind of just reaped out the Shining part from the book and made a movie that has very little to do with the actual Shining part of it, and just went full horror with it, which for the most part worked. But if you're going to make an adaptation of Dr. Sleep and not put in the effort to give audiences the context behind the book that was not present in the Shining movie, then people are just not going to get it. And it floors me, because I saw people talking throughout the movie. The few people that were actually in the theater, there was not really much enthusiasm for the film, apparently, even though it's like the opening night. It seemed like people just didn't get it, and which I totally understand, because I've read the books, and they make sense to me, because I already understood all the context, I already knew what the plot points were, I already knew what the characters were doing. But man, if you didn't read them, it's not even going to make sense to you. Or at least not everything. Not the really important world building and the understanding of the magic. The True Knot will literally not make sense to you. The idea of this cult of people literally feeding off The Shining will not make sense to you. Because you'll probably think, oh, they're just pulling this completely out of their asses. The fact that there's a lot of people who don't even realize that there is a sequel to The Shining, or that The Shining was a book first, tells you a lot about how little people are going to understand from this film. At least, fully understand. The main plot, I think people will get, but, I mean, I even saw some people say that this is a TLJ-level bad movie. I don't agree with that, but if you're coming at it from the perspective of only a movie watcher, I could totally understand that, because it would seem to be a complete disservice to the movie, because the movie completely disrespected the source material anyway. So on one hand, I would say that if you haven't read the books, don't even bother with this movie. I mean, I'd still kind of argue that anyway, because it wasn't good. But if you haven't read the books and aren't really knowledgeable on what all these concepts are, then it just won't even... it'll be incoherent to you. Like, certain characters and their motivations and the power of The Shining will seem like a total retcon, or just something some dude... It almost comes across as a fan fiction if you haven't read the books. So, just from a sequel standpoint, completely ignoring the context of the novels, it won't make sense. Which is a real shame, because there was actually some potential here to actually meld either the book or the movie into something and still make it work with the central plot of Dr. Sleep. But let's get into... I guess I'll start by saying, like, there are some good things to the movie. There are some shots that are very good. The soundtrack was decent when it was actually used, which is not much at all. I think the most prevalent track that I even remembered was the Shining main theme, which is fine. It's a great theme, but I mean, if your most iconic theme is a theme from a different movie, then it's not really saying much about your film. The acting was fair. I don't remember the woman's name. I believe she was the mom in The Haunting of Hill House. She was excellent as Rose the Hat. I think she was probably the most accurate to the book. There were a couple things about her performance that I wasn't too keen on, but it wasn't really the performance, it was more just the writing of the character. But for the most part, she conveyed the malice and the kind of disturbing almost sexual gratification she got from devouring The Shining, the way that that was conveyed was actually really, really good. I think she was probably the best role in the entire film. Ewan McGregor as Dan Torrance, he was good. I mean, he put on a good performance. I wasn't really convinced by everything, but that was more of a writing issue, because there was some really bad dialogue in this movie. The guy who played Billy Freeman, he put on a good performance, or at least he tried to, with what he was given. The problem is that he's not Billy Freeman. Billy Freeman in the book is supposed to be like this 70-year-old kind of snarky old dude. Instead, he's like this, I want to say, mid-30s, mid-40s guy. All the snark is gone. He's really nice, but there's not really much else to his character beyond that. Abra's actress, I don't know who she is. She's not awful, but she's not very good. I don't know how much to attribute that to the script itself, as opposed to her acting ability. Some of it definitely seemed a script issue, but she wasn't very convincing in her role. The actress who played Wendy, I don't think she had much time to shine. The True Knot, they didn't really have much time to shine either. And was there any other actor I can even think of? Not that I can think of, no. So, I think we'll go with that. Some of the sound design was pretty good. The effects were really good. When the True Knot dissolves, I was kind of terrified of seeing that in the movie, because I was like, oh god, the way it's described in the book, it makes sense in the context of the book, but I didn't think that it would work in a movie format. But the way they showed the True Knot, like, cycling and dying was actually pretty good. I actually really liked the way that they showed how they kind of dissolve and turn into corpses as their shine is evaporating, so to say. The gore effects were pretty solid. Cinematography was fair. I don't think there was any problems I had with the shots themselves and the composition of the frames. It was more the editing that I had an issue with, which isn't really a cinematography issue. This is a post issue. And that's about all I can say that's good. Most unfortunately. There was a couple moments where there was good old Mike Flanagan horror from The Haunting of Hill House that I thought was actually pretty good. The problem is that there were only, like, maybe 2 or 3 moments that I can think of in the movie where that horror was shown. Granted, the book itself wasn't really a horror novel. It was more delving into the actual power of The Shining. And, you know, he did pretty well with what he put into the movie, particularly with some of the old Overlook Hotel ghosts. They were executed pretty well. It seems to be a good movie from every perspective that isn't a substantive writing one, unfortunately. Which is a shame, because the book is really, really good. So we have a lot of issues going in. The pacing and the editing is what really brings down what's otherwise a really solid adaptation of the book. Which is, I mean, you guys know me. I want a movie to be a good adaptation of the book. I think you are creatively bankrupt and really kind of a shit person if you're going to essentially steal someone else's work to make something else. Like, make your own shit, or don't, or for me, I want it to either be, you make your own shit with its own title and it stands on its own merits, or you remain faithful to the thing you want to adapt. Because otherwise you're just bankrupt, and creatively bankrupt in my eyes. I can understand a few changes. I'm not going to say, like, all changes are bad. I think the Lord of the Rings are really good adaptations of the books, despite having their fair share of changes. But then when this movie tries to be relatively faithful for the first 2/3, I couldn't even get behind that because it was so badly executed from technical standpoints, with the editing, with the dialogue, with the total lack of character development and world building for so many of these things. Like I said, the True Knot has almost no development, so you can watch that movie and still come away not even having the faintest understanding of who they are, where they came from. They're just like some random people that eat The Shining, unless you've read the book, in which case I don't think you should have to read the book to understand the context of the film that it's supposed to be adapting. The characters were not well developed. There were some that were charming. I think Rose the Hat did a very good job, or the actress did a very good job of making Rose the Hat come alive as a very good villain. But beyond that, I mean, there's no reason to like Billy Freeman beyond he comes across as a nice guy. There's no reason to like Dan Torrance because he's not really nice at all. He just is incidentally pulled into this situation he doesn't really want to be in, but has to be in, which is kind of a contradiction to his character in Doctor Sleep, because he actively does try to help Abra with this situation and tries to redeem himself for very bad things he does at the very beginning of the book. And I think a lot of my issues, aside from the boredom factor, aside from the editing, aside from the bland characters and bad world building, comes down to the end, where things just stop making sense and where Mike Flanagan was like, okay, we're not going to be faithful to the book at all anymore. They kill Billy Freeman arbitrarily for no reason, which completely fucks up the plan that was like really well detailed and had a lot of thought put into it in the book. John Dalton was in the movie, but he was almost an afterthought. I don't know why they would even include him if they're not even going to have him do anything, especially when he's extremely important to the plot and getting a lot of things moving, especially with trying to convince Abra's dad not to kill Dan, since the situation involved with him and Abra is a little strange sounding, not put into the context of the main plot. There were some things that just wouldn't make sense with the power of The Shining. Very early on with John Dalton, there's a moment where Dan tells him, like, hey, you're missing your watch, it's over on this thing. And that is a thing that happens in the book, but it was so poorly conveyed in the movie that you could watch that scene and not understand where it came from, what Dan was doing. It's very odd. At the end of the movie, they decide, let's go back to the Overlook Hotel, which they do to an extent in the book. In the Shining novel, the Overlook Hotel burns to the ground because they overload the boiler, set off an explosion, and then the whole thing burns to the ground. So they go to the area that the Overlook is in, but not to the actual hotel itself. The hotel's gone. There is a bit of potential there with showing some of the ghosts, since, the movie didn't destroy the hotel. And I was actually, to be perfectly honest, a little bit intrigued to see what they do with that. But they didn't really seem to utilize it as much as they could have. They open up the little mind latches that are very poorly explained in the movie to bring the ghosts back and have them join the fray to try and combat the True Knot. But without it, without the context, it doesn't make any sense. Like, the idea that Dan has when they go to the Overlook Hotel is, it's bad for us there because the ghosts want to eat The Shining, which, again, it's not in the Shining movie, so people that don't read the books are going to be like, that sounds like a retcon. Sorry, just a moment. So people are going to be very confused by that on its own. But it doesn't even make sense from Dan's perspective, because the whole point of going to the Overlook Lodge in the book is that that was where the True Knot was already. So they went to go fight them on what was essentially their own turf, and Abra wasn't physically there. She was projecting herself through The Shining, and it was Dan and Billy Freeman who went. Which was a good plan in the book that they didn't follow through with in the movie because they decided to kill Billy Freeman arbitrarily. And it just doesn't even make sense that Dan would say, let's just go to the Overlook Hotel. It happens in the book. This must be the plan. It doesn't make sense that he would take Abra there knowing the danger of the hotel. It kind of makes him look like a bit of a retard. Because why on earth would you think that that's a better place? And his justification is, well, it was bad for me, so it must be bad for the True Knot too. Which is such a terrible justification. Because, first off, the ghosts are evil. The True Knot's evil. I mean, you could reasonably make an argument that it would be... that the ghost, that is, would be on the True Knot's side as opposed to theirs. Or as an impartial, that is. But no, Dan's just like, hey, it's bad for me, it must be bad for them too. Doesn't make any sense. There's no logical through line for it. And even Abra's like, are you sure about this? And he's like, not really, but we're gonna do it anyway. Great justification, guys. And so he goes there, and there's this scene, this really long, drawn-out scene that doesn't really lead anywhere, where Dan talks with Jack Torrance, that being Jack Nicholson's character from The Shining. And... you know, on one hand, it's a nice little bit of fan service, because it's like, oh, hey, Jack Nicholson, I remember you were crazy in this movie. The problem is that it really ruins a very good payoff from the book when Dan sees Jack standing at the Overlook Lodge as they're leaving. And it also just doesn't lead anywhere. Like, he has this conversation about how alcoholism really ruins you. Which was a very good, not very good, but it was a prominent theme in the book that was lightly touched upon in the movie and then proceeded to completely forget about it. Like, they have Dan go to these AA meetings. They don't go anywhere with it. It seems like they thought to themselves, yeah, we need to have the alcohol part from the book in the movie, which, yeah, sure. But then they don't go anywhere with it. There's no payoff with it. There's no ending to that storyline. There's no redemption arc for Dan after he kills, or doesn't directly kill, but leads to the death, or at least his what he believes is the death of, I don't remember the character's name, the woman and her son from the very beginning of the novel. So he's robbed of his redemption arc. He doesn't really go anywhere with that AA meeting shit. And then he has this random conversation with his father as a ghost that goes absolutely nowhere, reaps a very good payoff from the book, and then you could easily just forget the whole thing even happened. Toward the end, when they're in the Overlook Hotel, there's also just some very strange random shots from the Shining movie to be like, hey, remember when Jack Torrance slammed the axe against the door and Wendy was screaming like as he was trying to cut his way in? Like, obviously we understand that. We're watching the sequel to that book. Or, that movie, rather. And then they decided to show us, after giving us the exact same shot from the movie as Dan's looking through the hole in the door, then they cut right to that point in the Shining movie, and it's like, why'd you include that? We're not retarded. We know what we're looking at. It's a sequel to The Shining. Obviously, that's what we're looking at. There's another one where it has Jack running through the walls chasing, or the halls, chasing after Dan as a kid. And it doesn't really have much to do with the context of the scene. There's a lot that's just very bizarre. There's a point where Rose gets her, like, the back of her knees cut with this knife that Abra has in Danny's, like, little mind game shit he plays with her at the end. But rather than affecting her in the real world, like it was with her hand earlier on in the movie, it just doesn't have any effect on her at all. And she just gets over it immediately. This bitch gets almost gets her arm chopped off, and it doesn't even make sense. She acts as though it doesn't happen. She just goes and slams the axe into Dan's leg, and she's walking around as though the axe wound did nothing to her, which, granted, there can be the excuse of, oh, she inhaled a ton of The Shining just before coming out here. But then, for some reason, it like selectively harms her when the plot needs it to, or doesn't need it to, depending. All to lead toward Dan dying and Abra just escaping to nowhere. And the movie has the original ending of The Shining, right, where Dan, he's going around chasing after Abra, effectively mirroring what Jack Torrance did in the book, which is all good and fine in concept, rather. But in execution, it doesn't really make much sense. It's a real big fuck you to the character. And then on top of that, he goes to activate the boiler, which doesn't make sense, because how would Dan know how to do that? The reason that Jack knew is because he was tasked with looking over the Overlook Hotel. And so Dan suddenly knowing how to turn on the boiler to activate, or to overload it to burn down the hotel just doesn't make any sense. And, you know, me as a book reader, it's like, I get what you're doing, but it's not earned. And it doesn't make sense in the context of the films, because if you didn't read the books, then you won't understand what's happening. And it almost comes across as a total insult to the first film, or the original film. It's very disappointing, is what I would say. The movie has a lot of good elements going for it. Like, the directing isn't bad. It's the editing that's the issue, which I don't know if that's... I don't know how much the director has to do with the editing process, so I don't know how much of this I can pin on Mike Flanagan. But the editing is utterly incompetent. The character development is vapid. The world building just doesn't make sense unless you've read the books. The acting is subpar. There's a couple good roles. And then if you haven't read the books at all, then you won't understand a lot of the things it's trying to sell you. Like, The Shining being this power that was obviously the main plot of the first book is going to come across as a giant retcon to anyone that hasn't read the books. It's going to come across as this weird, like I said earlier, almost kind of fan fiction level writing that will just insult a bunch of people. And as I mentioned earlier, it's like, you could have done something with this. Like, one of the nice things about the Dr. Sleep book is that it has the perspective of the villains and the perspective of the protagonists. And it switches between them, but it also has a lot to show you, like, what their lives are like, how their culture works, how the Shining power works, all their development and everything. And you could make a really good TV show out of that, but a 2-hour movie doesn't do it enough justice. It's honestly kind of irritating, because even though I knew going in it was probably going to be bad, it just doesn't... It could have been something good. And that's almost worse than it just being flat-out bad, is that there's the bones of a really good movie hidden in this rotting carcass of a really bad one. And the big thing that I knew was going to mess up this movie is the forced diversity. And while they don't necessarily draw attention to it, like, there's no political messaging in the movie, which, you know, good on you. You didn't shove politics down everyone's throats. The act of making Abra black is... It leads to a huge plot hole with the main narrative. So in the Dr. Sleep book, Abra and Dan are related. I don't remember. I'd have to go back and rewatch the Shining movie because it's been a couple years. Because I don't remember if they specifically reference this like the Shining book does. But in the book, at least, Jack Torrance had an affair with Wendy, and one of those affairs resulted in him having a bastard child, and Abra is essentially Dan's distantly related niece. And it's because of that blood relation that they're able to communicate through The Shining. Because without knowing each other, without having met each other, and without with being so young already, it doesn't make any sense that Abra would just naturally reach out to some random dude that also has The Shining that just isn't related to her at all. Now, the movie made her mixed race, so you could argue, sure, there's room for them to be related. But the movie never brings it up like the book did, and the book brought that up because it seals a plot hole, because otherwise it's just extremely convenient. It's very convenient that Abra would just reach out to Dan, of all people, without having any kind of relation to him beyond having The Shining, because otherwise that would just mean that anyone with The Shining could reach out to anyone for no real reason. Especially when she's just a kid. It gets stronger as you become, like, teenage to young adulthood. That's, like, generally where the books establish that you're strongest with The Shining, which is why Abra becomes stronger in it as the book goes on. But she reaches out to Dan almost as an infant. Well, yeah, as an infant, because she plays the piano in the book. And that's just not touched upon at all in the movie. It's just really depressing that you have this really great premise, you have this really great source material, and then you just don't really respect it at all. So, don't watch this movie, in summary. It's really bad. Which sucks because I had at least a little bit of hope. Not much. But a little bit of hope because Mike Flanagan was directing it. I would probably have to sit down and script out everything for a full video to get across all my thoughts, and I probably want to rewatch the movie because this is just an unscripted rant. I only just got back from the theater minutes before I went live, so a lot of things I really don't like about it. A lot of things people that don't know anything about the books are really not going to like about it. I would suggest don't watch it because it's not really worth your time. Just another bad movie in a year filled with, you know, bad movies. Do you think the criticism the music has to tell you how to feel in media is bad? The criticism that music needs to tell you... Music has to tell you how to feel in media. Well, it doesn't have to tell you how to feel. It can just help make it... I don't necessarily think it's bad. I think it feels a little cheap if the emotional payoff isn't already included in the writing. I think the music just adds to it, unless, like I said, if the music is really sad or emotional or dramatic, and it just doesn't fit the writing at all. You kind of got to earn it in both respects for me to care, because you can still have a good soundtrack, like Ramin Djawadi's, or Javadi, rather. I always mispronounce his name. His soundtrack for Game of Thrones Season 8 is excellent. It's wonderful. But it's not really earned because of the writing, which isn't his fault. It's D&D's fault. You don't need to use music to manipulate people, but, you know, it does. Just like the Rise of Skywalker trailer, the recent one. I saw that play just before Dr. Sleep, and that swelling of the original Star Wars theme going over the trailer. You can tell that was purely meant to manipulate the audience and give them, like, look, it's all a bunch of feels. You like Star Wars, don't you? It can be used to manipulate your emotions. It can also be used to better add to the theme, not to the theme, to the scene itself. Kind of got to go on a case-by-case basis with it. Destiny, the video game, has an excellent soundtrack, and it doesn't match what's happening at all in any respect, unfortunately. Is it possible for a movie to be much... Is it possible for a movie to be much like the book Right, where it's nearly shot for shot, word for word, event for event? Oh, of course it is. It's possible. I'd have to go through all the book to movie adaptations I've seen to give you a good example of one. I'd say... Honestly, I'd probably say... the closest one I can think of is the Da Vinci Code movie, which is it's like 95% accurate to what happens in the book. The most deviation happens at the end of the movie. Which isn't a huge deviation. It's not really a great book or a great movie, but that's the one that comes to mind. Most book-to-movie adaptations I see are pretty bad, so... I guess that's something. If you had one thing to change in Doctor Sleep, what would you change? I would make it... Well, I would make it accurate to the book, like 100%. Well, that's obvious. If I had one thing to change, I would make it a TV show. Because there's so much you have to establish, so many characters you have to go through, so many world-building points you have to introduce to the audience that were not introduced in Kubrick's adaptation, or shit adaptation of the movie. So I would want to make it into like a good 10-episode miniseries. I think you could do it pretty well that way. When you watch a movie show when you watch a movie/show that adapted a book or comic, do you both watch and read it? I make an effort to, if I know that it's based off of something, because I don't always know. For example, I didn't know that The Haunting of Hill House was based on a book until I was almost finished with the show, and I still have yet to read that one. If I know beforehand that it's based on a book or comic, then I will almost always try to read the book or comic beforehand. Otherwise, I mean, if I don't know, or if I learn too late, then I'll just get through whatever it is I'm watching, and then I'll go to the source material. There's an animated movie version of The Killing Joke. If you didn't know, the graphic novel was created by Watchmen creator Alan Moore. Yeah, I haven't bought it yet, but it's on my like Amazon wish list to get the Killing Joke comic. I have not seen the movie. So, like, unfortunately, I can't really say much on that end. Comics are the storyboard for their own films. You would think that, but the Watchmen movie was not a very good story, or it didn't really use much of the comics as a point-for-point storyboard. I see a lot of anime very, very accurate to the manga. I guess I haven't really seen too many... I didn't even mean to do that. I guess I haven't really seen too many comic to movie adaptations. I think Watchmen's the only one that comes to mind. I've read some Spider-Man comics a long time ago, but none of them, at least to my memory, were strictly based off of any of the movies I've seen. Or the movies based off of them, rather. I'd have to see more comic to movie-based adaptations. I'm more book to movie, if anything. Ever played Horizon Zero Dawn, and if so, thoughts? I have. It's visually pretty good. The music is fair. It's extremely fun to play. Like, the combat's really good. I wish it was on PC, given that it's a precision-based game, but, you know, for PS4, it did its job fine. The story was garbage, though. Like, the most cliche crap, and the characters were vapid. I had no idea who anyone was. I wanted to skip the dialogue most of the time because it was really boring. The voice actors were god-awful. they conveyed so little emotion in their lines that I felt like I was just listening to people reading off a script and not actually understanding the context behind what they were saying. You know, from a gameplay standpoint, really fun. From a story perspective, awful. Have you read or watched Full Metal Alchemist? I have not. That's one thing I love about anime. It rarely deviates from the source material. Yeah, I can't say I've seen too much anime and read too many manga, but from the adaptations I've seen of both, they seem to be very, very close most of the time. I can think of a few differences, like with Attack on Titan, but not major ones. Any thoughts on Death Stranding? It looks extremely boring. I watched the Radbrad's like first hour or so of it, and the whole time I was thinking, where's the gameplay? What do you do? This looks like it should be just some shitty movie, not a video game. So I already didn't have any interest in it. People tell me I should because it's a Kojima game. I don't care. But yeah, it looks really, really boring to me. I don't think I'm gonna pick it up. Have you read V for Vendetta? I have not, but I do own it. I kind of want to go through all of Alan Moore's works now after reading Watchmen. Because, man, he's a really good writer. What do you think of the Ancient Magus' Bride? I think I'll go based off of the manga and the anime. I like the magic system. I like the world. I like the creatures. The characters, I don't really know how to feel about them most of the time. They're interesting in concept, but I don't feel like the author's really taken too many risks with them. They don't really seem to do anything that really makes me say, oh wow, I really love this character. I really only know the names of the two main characters, and I always have to be reminded of all the others. The anime it's well animated, but man, the voice acting is, particularly for the dub. I usually like to listen to dubs because I want to pay attention to the animation, but I cannot listen to that dub because it takes place in the UK, the story that is, and for some reason they just couldn't hire a single British voice actor, so you have a bunch of American voice actors saying bloke and bloody hell and all this shit, and it completely shatters my immersion every single time I listen to it. So it's like, no, I'm only listening to the sub. I haven't actually finished the anime. I'm pretty caught up with the manga, though. It's interesting. I feel like I want to see more of it, though. I want to see the author actually do something with these concepts rather than just give us more concepts. What do you think of Noida? I haven't heard of that. Do you regret deleting your own channel? Or old channel? No, I do not. Hi, Rags. On a scale of 1 to 10, how shocked were you when you read Volume 4 of Berserk? 11,000. You know, people were telling me, this is an awesome manga, you gotta read it. And don't get me wrong, it is awesome. But people told me, like, you know, it's really gory, it's really violent, it's got a ton of awesome action. Nobody told me about what happens at the beginning of Volume 4. I wasn't expecting that. Especially, like, to the main character, too. I mean, I don't think it's a bad story decision. I haven't actually gone any further than that. It was very, very surprising, because I was not expecting that kind of thing to happen in the book. Watch Bacano? I don't know what that is. If there's one comic adaptation I can recommend to anyone, that would be Batman Under the Red Hood. It's one of the best comic adaptations out there. I will keep that in mind. What'd you think of Shazam? I'm not watching it because Mauler and Southpaw told me it sucks. Oh, shit. Whoa. Ah. Noida is the power powder game plus dungeon crawling. Alright, don't know what that means. Did you make the correct decision in reading Mistborn? I have started it. I got through the prologue today. I had other things to do, so I haven't gotten any further than that. But the prologue seems pretty interesting. I want to know how that one guy whose name I can't remember killed all those people. It's piqued my curiosity. But man, was the summary in the book jacket just awful. It was like, here's the entire plot of the book. Oh, thank you. I would have rather just read the book. What about whatever happened to the Man of Tomorrow? It's a Superman comic by Moore. I will have to check that out. I haven't heard of it. What's your take on Aragon? I'd have to reread it because the last time I did was in like, I want to say 8th grade maybe. So it's been a long time. A lot of people tell me it sucks. I have only good memories of it, but again, I haven't read it since the 8th grade. His Dark Materials, have you seen the first episode of it? No, but I plan on seeing it with a friend next Sunday. We're like, kind of hate watching the Watchmen show now. And we were planning on watching his Dark Materials last Sunday, but then we found out it comes out on Mondays instead, and neither of us are free on Monday nights, so we're going to be watching it a little late, but we do plan on seeing it. I'm excited for it, or at least I'm hopeful for it. I don't think I can really say I'm excited for anything anymore, because it's bad. Things are bad. We can't have good things anymore. Thoughts on the Warrior series? You mean the one with the cats? If that's the one you're talking about, I kind of dropped off when, what was it, Omen of the Stars or whatever, when they started, like, bringing in, like, undead cats. That's when I was like, okay, you officially lost your mind. Granted, Power of 3 was pretty garbage, too. I stopped caring around that point when they made some giant plot twist of, like, you're not the father, this is the father, and it's like, no, this is also not the mother, this is the mother. It was such a convoluted pile of shit. Really bad plot twist. I recommend the Old Man Logan comics. It's Wolverine at its lowest low and is most vulnerable. Yeah, I heard that Logan was, like, very loosely based off of that. I tried reading some of the X-Men comics, not those ones, but they weren't very good. You a fan of the band Red? I am. I wasn't a fan of their last album, and I wasn't a fan of their 4th album, but I really like everything else. Thoughts on Matt Reeves, his Planet of the Apes films, and him directing The Batman? I don't really know much of his work. I think I watched, like, one of the Planet of the Apes films forever ago, but I barely remember it, and I don't really think I liked it. Thoughts on answering questions about Modern Warfare? Mauler, do you really want me to play that game? It's just gonna make me angry-tisms. Especially if we get Piccadilly again. Thoughts about Castlevania? I liked the first season. I haven't really put any time into watching the second season. I don't even think I have a Netflix subscription anymore. What did you think of It Chapter 2? It was a mess. I subjectively liked the character stuff, but I'm gonna be the first to admit that it's pretty much only because I loved the book, and I thought the movie treated most of the characters well. I don't think they ever did Mike Hanlon the justice he deserved. They actually kind of made him look like an idiot in the second one, which is really a shame. How is your Jeb doing? It's a little fried at the moment, unfortunately. I hate HBO Watchmen Wolf. I hate it. Yeah, I do too. ER posted a video about it too. It's very good. Very, very good. We can back out of the lobby if it's Piccadilly. We've been doing that alright. Yeah, after this match I'll probably hop on with you, Moogly. You seen the Dark Crystal series yet? No, but it is on the list for me and Muller to watch. The very, very long list of things we have to watch. Thoughts on Dr. Sleep? The book's really good, the movie's really not. Which film is more depressing, Joker, The Road, or Logan? Oh god, The Road. I don't know if The Road is more depressing than Requiem for a Dream. I haven't seen Requiem for a Dream in a while. But those are, like, the two most depressing movies I've ever watched. Buy RDR2 on Steam next month. I'll think about it. I'm not super interested in it. Don't have anything against it. Never played the first one either. But, yeah, I haven't seen anything that's really piqued my interest about it. Other than that, it's one of those games I'm supposed to be interested in because the developer that makes generally good games made it. Have you played Hotline Miami? I played a little bit of it, but that was a long time ago. And I don't really think I made it far into it at all. Have you seen Breaking Bad and El Camino? I've seen Breaking Bad. I haven't seen El Camino. I liked Breaking Bad. Very good show. Are there any movies you're looking forward to seeing? I kind of want to see 1917. That looks like it could be good. But every time I say, it looks like it could be good, it almost always turns out to be, that's really bad. 1917 and Star Wars. Can't wait. Thoughts on The Mandalorian? It looks really bland and uninteresting. I don't see why people are so interested or so like enthusiastic about it. I haven't seen anything that looks like a really particularly good show, and it's Disney Star Wars, so I think people need to stop getting their hopes up about it. What's your opinion on what's recently been going on in the Attack on Titan manga? I want to see how it all ends, but I wasn't a big fan of, like, the whole, you know, taking the Marlians and Eldian shit and using that instead of the actual Titan-based shit. Like, one of the cool things about Attack on Titan was the idea of these are the last humans left, and we're going to try and fight back and retake the world. But then they turned it into this, like, this bizarre version of, God, what's it called? I should know this. The Truman Show. And I feel like it really killed the stakes. So, I'm not a big fan of where they took it, but I want to see. I'll see it through to the end. Maybe as a whole I'll end up liking it, but I don't know, it's kind of lost the appeal for me as of late. Thoughts on Keemstar? I don't really watch his stuff, so... What's your favorite pizza? Mine is margarita. I'm very milquetoast with my pizza. I like pepperoni, chiefly. Chicken, depending on what kind of chicken is used. Sausage, depending on what kind of sausage is used. Bacon. I'm a very meat-oriented pizza guy. What are you drinking, Pepsi or Dr. Pepper? Dr. Pepper, of course. If you had to read a list of quotes and decide if they were Movie Bob quotes or neo-Nazi quotes, do you think you could sort them correctly? Probably not, actually. Has Jay watched The Lord of the Rings yet? Oh, I'm sure you already know the answer to that question. Thoughts on New Vegas? I'm not really a big Fallout fan at all. I liked Fallout 2. That was about it. New Vegas' gameplay is a huge turnoff for me. It's really ugly to look at. The characters, I don't really... I mean, it's been a while since I played it, so I'd have to actually go back to get you specific references, but I wasn't a big fan of the characters of the world from what I actually played of it on the 360. But Fallout in general, I'm just not interested in. Thoughts on Saint Sonia's new album? It is excellent. It's the best Adam Gonnier work I've heard since 1X. Well, I'll say Life Starts Now. It was a pretty good album. Because, like, I didn't like Transit of Venus at all. There's, like, a couple good songs, and that's it. The Saint Sonia opening album, or debut album, rather, it was decent, but there wasn't any songs on there that I really liked to an extent that I would go out of my way to listen to them. And I was kind of apprehensive about seeing more of their stuff, because it seemed like Adam was going in a direction I didn't really like. But their new album was absolutely awesome. I've been loving it. And on that note, I don't really have much else to say. I felt more like ranting about Dr. Sleep, because I needed someone to rant about it to. And I don't know if Moojly is streaming, or if he is... or if he just wants to play a game normal. I'll ask him. Because if he's streaming, then I'll send you guys another link to the stream. And we'll just go from there. On the upside, Tool concert tomorrow. That's something good. Woohoo! He's on Metal's channel. Ah, gotcha. Iowa. Okay. And on that note, it was fun ranting to all of you about this movie you probably didn't care about in the first place. So, I'll see you guys later. I don't know the link to Metal's stream. You might be able to find it on Twitter. I imagine he probably posted it somewhere there. And I will go hang out with Moojly and play that terrible Call of Duty game.